Hi there, I'm Victoria Peat and welcome along to this video tutorial where I will be showing you how to sew the letter J from my Mini Foundation Paper Piecing Alphabet. Here's the pattern for you. This is what you get. It's available as a PDF download. You get 33 characters in total. You've got all the letters of the alphabet, plus you've got 7 additional special characters available for you to sew. So today I'm going to show you how to sew the letter J. Should we have a quick look at the pattern? Here we go. So the pattern itself, oh, it's coming. Here we go. The pattern itself is ranked as a number 2, 2 out of 3 stars. It's made in one entire piece, as you can see from the assembly diagram, but there are a couple of smaller pieces. So if you are thinking about which ones to sew, and you're trying to start off with easy ones, this is a 2 out of 3 stars. You've got your layout diagram here to help you plan with your fabrics. You can do a bit of colouring in, and then your assembly diagram will just tell you which order that you need to sew everything in. So what I've done is I have the pattern piece is down here. The pattern piece is down here on the pattern. I've roughly cut out just outside of the dotted edge of that pattern piece, and I have pre-folded all of the lines because I find that the easiest way to sew foundation paper piecing is by folding each of those sections. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew that, and that will hopefully give you a bit of an idea as to how that letter comes together. So let's have a look. If I just change the camera, give us a bit more space and a bit more light. We're going to start off with, as we do with all foundation paper piecing, we're going to follow the numbers. We're going to start off with piece number 1, which is a background piece. So we need a piece of fabric that is going to work for that. And I'm going to be using an add an eighth ruler rather than an add a quarter ruler, only because when you start to get to some of these really much smaller pieces on the pattern, and let me just see if we can get that camera to focus on there. You can see there piece number 3 and piece number 5 start to get quite small. So I find that by using an add an eighth ruler rather than add a quarter ruler, you're just reducing those seam allowances down that little bit more. And it makes your finished block less bulky. So we're going to start off with piece number 1. So we're making sure that the piece of fabric that we choose is going to be big enough to cover piece number 1 plus leave your seam allowance around the outside. So we need 1/8 of an inch around the outside edges. So I'm just going to lay that on there just to give myself a bit of a guide, and I'm going to roughly cut out a rectangle that's going to be the right size. So that looks as though that's going to be plenty big enough. I'm then going to take my fabric glue pen. This one is a Prim glue pen. It's neon yellow, but don't worry, it dries clear and does wash out. I'm going to place a little bit of glue along the back of piece number 1 on the pattern. I'll put the lid back on there. And then I'm going to stick the pattern piece to the wrong side of your first piece of fabric. So if this was a print, this would be the wrong side and the print would be facing downwards. I'm going to place the pattern piece over the top, making sure that it's nice and central, and that seam allowance that I've allowed around all the edges is still there, and I'm not too close to any of the edges. So I've got that's secured and that's in place. We're now going to look at piece number 2, and piece number 2 is has got the little dots on it, and that denotes that the fabric here is going to be the fabric I'm using to create the letter itself. So here I'm using a pink. So I need a piece of pink that's going to sit underneath. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to fold along the line between piece number 1 and piece number 2, and because I've pre-folded, it's easy to just fold back there. And I'm going to trim that seam allowance using my add an eighth ruler to give myself an accurate 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and a nice raw edge. I can then use that raw edge to place up against my next fabric, which is the pink. So I've got a straight edge on my pink fabric, and I'm going to line that up with the edge that I've just cut on the navy blue background piece. Now I'm looking for a piece of fabric behind here, this pink piece here, that's big enough to go left and right of this line and top and bottom. So I know I'm dealing with an and an eighth ruler, so I can actually just squeeze this pattern piece just across a little bit, wastes a little bit less fabric, and I'm just flipping back to make sure that the fabric sitting behind is big enough. And it's at a bit of a funny angle underneath, so I am actually going to shift it back across to the right a touch. You can use a window or a light box or something just to check, or you can just keep flipping your fabric backwards and forwards just to have a look and see whether you think it's going to match, whether it's going to sit properly underneath. So here I like to fold the fabric back and pick up the paper back. So I'm going to pick up the paper and my 2 layers of fabric all in one go, and I'm going to take it across to my sewing machine. At this point here, I lay these down and I just make sure that the fabrics are still sitting with their raw edges matching. And if they are, I will then flip over my paper pattern piece and I'm going to sew on the line, on the solid line between piece number 1 and section number 1 and section number 2. I have my machine set up. I have a straight stitch plate on my machine and I've reduced my stitch length to a 1. I'm going to wind using my hand crank to bring my needle down in the right position, lower my presser foot, and I'm just going to follow that line. And then, so I've sewn on the line between piece number 1 and piece number 2, and that's what it looks on the reverse. I'm then going to press that flat, and then I'm going to press this pink fabric away. I'm just using today, or as I do most days, I'm using my mini iron and a wool pressing mat. So I've pressed that nicely, and now what we need to do is trim away some of the excess fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim, because piece number 2 at further stages in construction are going to be joined with piece number 11, piece number 10, and piece number 4. So I'm going to fold back along each of these lines in turn and trim off using the 1/8 of an inch ruler, and that will just get rid of and release this bit of excess fabric here. So I'm going to fold back along the top line. Oh. Hello, wood, fingers and thumbs. And then against the line between 2 and 10. Now I'm not sewing these yet, but I'm just trimming off the fabric to allow that to come away and it's not flapping around. I'm also going to trim off between the line between 2 and 4 because there's also a number 3 over here that I need to get to. I'm just going to fold back here and trim those off, get rid of these tiny little bits into my scrap bin, but I'm keeping this larger pink piece because I know I'll be able to use that later. Right, the piece that we're sewing next is piece number 3. So we're going to fold back between piece number 1 and piece number 3. It's a little diagonal line down here. Let me just bring that up and see if I can get the camera to, come on little camera. Might be easier if I just change the zoom on this camera. Try and pick that up. Oh goodness, sorry. No, it's not doing it. You'll see on the pattern piece that there's a tiny little triangle. So we're going to fold back between 1 and 3. I'm going to use my ruler just for a little bit of added accuracy. Fold back, and we're trimming off this excess here and leaving an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Get rid of that into my scrap bin. So we only need a very small piece of pink. So I'm going to go for one of my slightly smaller scraps of fabric. It's just this little triangle. So I've got quite a big piece here. And place the 2 raw edges up against each other. Pick all of those up and take them across to the machine. So I've then got my paper pattern piece, the pieces of fabric that are already sewn to it, plus the new piece that I'm going to sew it to, making sure that my seam allowances still match. Place them down on the bed of the machine, flip the paper across, and I'm going to sew along that tiny little line. So I'm just, as you can see, I'm just using this finger just to lift the edge of the presser foot, so I can hand crank the needle into the down position to make sure that I'm going to sew along the line in a nice straight line. Only a couple of stitches required, it's only a little one. So it's just a tiny little bit of stitching there. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to press flat and then I'm going to flip the pink over and press. So just be very careful to make sure that you're pressing exactly against that line of stitching. It's very easy to flip it back and accidentally press at an angle. Don't be too rough with your iron either. I'm just using the tip of my iron just to try and press that little section. So let's trim now. So we've got piece number 1, 2 and 3. Piece number 4 is also pink. I'm going to fold back along the line between 3 and 4. And you can see there how easily that one just folded back because I've pre-folded. It makes it very easy. But you can, of course, use a piece of postcard or the angled edge of your ruler if you prefer. So we need a relatively large size of the pink, and I think I'm going to use this larger piece here and lay that on top. Flip the paper back just to make sure that I'm looking at the correct part of the pattern piece. That's fine. Pick up, scoop everything up, bring it back across to the machine. Make sure the raw edges are still lined up, because what can happen is this piece underneath, instead of being straight, it can just go a little bit skew, and because you're dealing with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, you'll find that if you stitch along here, if this fabric has moved, you'll not be left with any seam allowance and you might end up with a hole in your work. So just take that little moment just to check that your raw edges are matching, because if you've ever unpicked foundation paper piecing, you'll know it's worth checking at every stage. Just lifting the presser foot, hand cranking down at the start of the line. I'm going to stitch and off we go. Okay, so I've sewn along the line. I say between 3 and 4, but it's going across the bottom of piece number 1 and piece number 2 as well as piece number 3. We shall press it flat and back on itself. Okay. So now we're going to trim. So this piece number 5, is a tiny little piece in here, a little rectangular one. All the rest of the pieces going forward on this particular character on the J are now all background pieces. Fold back along that line. I'm going to trim a little way, and then I'm going to trim along the line probably between 1 and 9, and then that should release this bit of fabric here. So I've just got 2 little scraps to get rid of, but then you can see this piece is still relatively big. You just have to watch for when you've sliced in, but that's good to keep for another letter. Right, so piece number 5, just a little diddy one. So we need, let's see if I've got a small piece of navy. Okay, just press that nice and flat. So let's fold that back along the line, place on a straight edge, scoop up all 3 pieces, all 3 layers, over to the sewing machine, make sure they're still all in line with each other, and sew along. And also just make sure when you slide forwards, just doubly make sure that the piece of fabric on the underside doesn't accidentally get caught on these feed dogs, because that can happen as well. So just make sure you're not doing that, because that is equally as frustrating. Lowering the the needle with the hand crank, lowering the presser foot and stitching those couple of little stitches to get piece number 5. Now we're going to press, and then we're going to flip the fabric over. Using my finger just to, and you can feel where that little line of stitching is, and you can push back with your finger and you can see where you've sewn, and then give it a press. Just use the tip of your iron to press. Don't go heavy-handed, and don't pull the fabric because then it will distort. So that's piece number 5 done. Now we need to do piece number 6. So I'm going to fold back along the line for piece number 6, and I'm going to trim so it releases this fabric here. I've pre-folded, so this is relatively simple to fold the paper back. And that fold on the paper just gives a little ledge for the add an eighth ruler to sit up against. Okay, piece number 6. If you look at piece number 6 on the pattern, you've got also, so you've got piece number 6 is this one here. Here, and you can see it just touches the outside edge of the pattern piece. So just make sure that you're sort of leaving enough for this 1/4 inch seam allowance. Most of that will get caught with piece number 7 and next to it piece number 8, but just don't be too tight with your seam allowance on this edge. Piece number 6. What am I doing? Piece number 6, I'm folding along the wrong line. I'm going to refold that with my ruler because I've lost track. There we go. And I'm going to place that on top. And I'm just making sure the raw edges are up against each other. And I'm just flipping back just to try and remind myself of where that pattern piece is, to make sure that I've not gone too far to the left or the right on your piece of fabric. Picking everything up, coming back across to the machine, flip the paper, slide underneath, lower the needle, get a nice straight line, and sew along. There we go, and we'll give this one a press as well. And you do find you get into a really nice rhythm with foundation paper piecing, I think. And I've got myself set up like this for filming, but this is generally how I have myself set up anyway for foundation paper piecing. I try and make sure that I've got everything to hand so that I'm not constantly moving from one spot to another. I do try and make sure that everything's nice and close by. Even if I'm not using this table, I might use one where I can just bring another little side table in, or I might pull the ironing board in and have that to my left, so it's sort of set up next to the dining room table or something like that. But try and make your life as simple as possible, because as you can see, there's so many processes that are repeated as you go along. Right, let's trim off these pieces. We're aiming for piece number 7 next. So let's fold back along the line for number 7. And we can trim and get rid of this excess here. And you'll feel as you go along with these pieces that are the pieces that are 2-star and 3-star pieces within the pattern, you'll feel that underneath here starts to get a little bit bulky. So when you come to use your add an eighth ruler or your add a quarter ruler, things get a little bit more bumpy. So just take your time and don't rush with the cutting, because that's when you make mistakes. So piece number 7, we need to make an allowance. I'll use a different colour pen this time. So this one here runs into this seam allowance on the outside edge. So you need a piece that's 1/8 of an inch between piece number 7 and the next pieces around it. But on this edge here, you need to make an allowance for 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on the outside edge. Let's grab that piece. 4 edges lined up. Pick it up and come over to the machine. And sew along line number 7. And I'm going to sew along that line, and I'm going to sew through the seam allowance, the 1/4 inch seam allowance on that outside edge. So you can see I've sewn along the line and then through the seam allowance at the bottom. You see that? Through the seam allowance. Press, press. What I would suggest is when you're pressing flat, always do it from this side. Don't do it on the paper side, because what I find is regardless of whether I've used an inkjet printer or a laser printer, sometimes the print comes off on the underside of your iron, and that's not great. Press. Ideally you would leave that to cool before you move it, but we'd be here all day otherwise. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to trim roughly along underneath piece number 7 on the outside edge, and I'm going to fold back against the line for number 9 and trim 1/8 inch along here, and that will get rid of this extra fabric hanging around. Okay, so let's have a look at that from this side. Your J coming together nicely. The next piece is piece number 8, which is a corner piece over here, just to give that little bit of curve on this side of the J. Fold back. This one also goes through the seam allowance. Trim those ones off, get rid of those. And what size piece are we looking for? Let's have a look. What have we got? I think I'll go for the larger piece. And I'll place that on a nice straight edge on my larger piece of fabric here. Pick it up and over to the machine. Flip the fabric over, and I'm sewing through. I'm starting through the seam allowance. Through the seam allowance first, and then along the line, the stitching line. And we'll give that a press. Some people like to use rollers or just like to finger press, but I like the sharpness that using an iron gives you. There we go. And now I'm going to try and release this fabric by folding back again against the line between 8 and 10 and the bit across the bottom. But let's do the piece between the seam allowance between 8 and 10 first. And then I'll roughly trim that little bit off here. There we go. So piece number 9 is next, and piece number 9, let me look, is this piece down this side. So piece number 9 has to be big enough to allow for this seam allowance at the bottom of the block, up the side, and then you just need 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch, whichever ruler you're using, to join piece number 9 to piece number 11 at a later stage. So I'm going to fold that back. You need a nice long edge, and actually I've been quite lazy. This has got a selvage on the on this fabric, so I'm just going to trim that selvage off, and that will give me a good size piece to use. So here I've placed that against that straight edge. We know that the fabric extends far enough beyond this seam allowance here, and I've got plenty going over to this left-hand side. Pick it up and stitch through, and we're going to start at the top of the line and we're going to sew through the seam allowance at the bottom, just lining up the line with the middle of my presser foot, hand cranking so that the needle goes into the down position, and sew. Okay, and trim the fabric and then press. So you can see how this one, if you've looked at a few of these videos or you've sewn a couple of the one-star letters or characters already, you'll see how this one's a little bit different. It's still relatively simple because it's sewn together in one section, but you've just got a couple of little pieces, which actually aren't that difficult, but they are there. So that's why I've rated this a 2-star. I'm now going to trim, roughly trim along the side here, just to release this fabric, and then we're going to go over and sew piece number 10 and then piece number 11. So we are on the final stretch. Right, so that's roughly cut along the bottom and the side. I'm going to flip back against piece number 10 to get rid of this bit here. So we use my add quarter ruler. Makes that neat and tidy. So let's go back along and do piece number 10. Fold it along. This one's exactly the same as piece number 9 in that you've got seam allowance you need to be aware of at the bottom and on the one side, but at the top we're going to be joining to piece number 11. So just make sure that you've got enough fabric along here. I'm not sure this piece is going to be quite big enough, so I'll just bring in a new piece of navy. And let's see, place that. I only need 1/4 of an inch to the past this solid line between 10 and 11, so I can go quite close to this raw edge. And you can see how the paper's sticking out, but that doesn't matter as long as I've got 1/8 of an inch or more extending past where this line is along here, then that's fine. And I've got my raw edges lined up there. They're still nice and straight. Flip the paper across, and I'm going to sew through the seam allowance at this end, and I'm going to come up to where line number 11 is. Oh, careful not to get that on my cutting mat, that would be a disaster. And I'm going to trim that off, this excess, roughly down one side and across the bottom. So now the final piece we have is piece number 11, and you need to make sure that you allow enough fabric to cover the 2 seam allowances on the left and the right and across the top edge. I'll fold back along the line for number 11. Trim back any excess fabric underneath, and place that on a nice straight edge. That one's not quite straight, we'll trim that in a minute. So if you do have a piece here and this is on a bit of an angle, but you know that this is straight and this is straight, what you can do is you can place that on, and then once you've stitched you can trim before you press, if that makes sense. You'll see. So I'll place that on, take it over, and I'm stitching all the way across from one side to another of the pattern piece through the seam allowances to the left and the right. Oh, so actually, so what I've got here is that these are uneven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my add 1/8 ruler, I'm just going to trim off these so that both seam allowances are the same before I press and flip. That just removes any extra bulk that there might be as a result. Oh, I'm going doolally. I'll press and flip that across. Okay, so now we just need to release this excess fabric here. So I'll just roughly go around. Right, so there's your J uncut. So now what we need to do is we need to get our old rotary cutter, one that is okay to cut through paper. This one has old blades that aren't sharp enough to cut through fabric on their own, but you will quite happily go through the layers of paper and fabric. I've also got my 6" by 12" ruler, and I am going to lay the ruler on top, and I'm lining the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with the solid outer edges of my pattern piece, which means that the outside edge of the acrylic ruler should line up with those dotted lines on the pattern piece. And I'm placing my hand. When I'm cutting, I'm making sure that my hand is away from the edge because I don't want to nick my fingers, but I'm placing my pressure evenly across the pattern piece. So you don't want to be placing your hand here because you can very easily then push your ruler as you push your blade against the ruler. So try and make sure that the weight of your hand is over the area that you're trying to cut. Nice even pressure with both hands. Now you could use a rotating cutting mat, but I'm a bit short on space here, so you could do that if that makes your life easier. And I'm just popping that blade facing away from me because it is a broken handle, but I don't have any children or pets that are going to come wandering by. And one last edge. I'm looking at this line, this outer edge against the dotted line, the 1/4 inch line, but I'm also looking at other lines just to make sure that I'm belt and braces nice and square. Here we go. And there's your letter J. Sweet, isn't it? So there you go. There's the letter J. That makes up part of the miniature foundation paper piecing alphabet. You get all 26 uppercase letters of the alphabet, plus you get 7 additional characters. I hope that's been really useful. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're new to foundation paper piecing, maybe start off with one of the 1-star characters. And if you're not sure what tools you need, I've used some of them today, but there's also a video that I've got on YouTube that talks about some of the essential tools or the tools that you might like to consider using for foundation paper piecing. Give me a shout, let me know if you've got any questions, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.